Hypixel Skyblock is Minecraft's largest MMORPG server, and it's held that title for years. With all of the unique things to do, the game consistently keeps players hooked for hours each day, every day. No doubt about it, the fan favorite aspect of Skyblock is definitely dungeons, because of its eccentric gameplay and replayability. Literally, most people playing Hypixel Skyblock right now are probably in a dungeon as you're watching this. It sounds perfect, right? The most fun part of the game, with a virtually unlimited amount of people to play with. I sure hope they have a good tutorial so I can join them. Oh my goodness gracious, I'm not reading all that. And I'm sure you don't want to either, so here I am to summarize it for you. I've taken all of the most important, fundamental elements of Hypixel Skyblock's dungeons and put it all in one video for you. I'll be going over literally every basic mechanic, so stick around for the full rundown. Alright, let's not waste any more time and get right into it. Let's start from square one. So what are dungeons? To put it simply, a dungeon is a series of randomly generated rooms filled with mobs, puzzles, and loot that provides a reward upon completion. Eventually, there's going to be many different types of dungeons, but for now, we only have the catacombs. Please note that anytime I, or really anyone else, refers to a dungeon, we're specifically talking about the catacombs. Anyways, the catacombs have many different levels, each floor being much more difficult to complete than the last. These dungeons can prove to be quite a difficult task to take on alone, so you should probably develop a team with a diverse skill set to complete them. But what makes them important? Why do they matter? Why should you do dungeons? Hypixel Skyblock has a lot of different branches for progression, and dungeons have become one of the most important to consider. Dungeons can provide loads of powerful gear, millions or even billions of coins through selling loot, and of course the ever so coveted Skyblock levels. Not to mention, a lot of late game gear requires a high catacombs level or floor completion. Really, it'd be silly to call them anything less than necessary. So how do you start playing dungeons? Of course, it's not as simple as creating a new profile and immediately hopping in a dungeon. It's expected that you'd experience some other, more fundamental aspects of the game before hopping into the catacombs. The only requirement to start playing dungeons is combat skill level 15, and that's it. I've already made a video about the fastest way to reach combat 15 from a fresh start. Feel free to check that out if that sounds interesting. So as long as you're at least combat skill level 15 and have an open, ready mindset, you're ready to start off your catacombs career. Alright, let's get started with the very basics. You first need to discover the dungeon hub, and you can't just warp there immediately after reaching combat 15, you need to discover it manually first. Near the large mountain in the main hub, there's a staircase behind the fountain where Jamie sits. Travel up the stairs and you'll find yourself in front of a portal. That's the portal to the dungeon hub. Once you manually travel there once, you can warp there anytime. Now I'll give you a quick tour around the dungeon hub. You can find many different NPCs here that all serve different functions. Mort acts as the gatekeeper for all of the dungeon floors. You'll talk to him to either join or start a dungeon party. Ophelia runs a shop that sells basic dungeon items that can help you progress. Malik is a jack-of-all-trades blacksmith. To be blunt, he can tinker around with all of your gear. From managing all of your different types of essence to adding stat-increasing stars to all of your gear, you can't really ignore this guy. Croesus will hold on to your dungeon loot for you to claim at a later time if you decide not to claim them mid-run. Guildford offers a bunch of different races you can complete, which gives you a talisman in return. And finally, Adventurer Saul has a one-step questline. More on him later. Dungeons also adds a new skill to your profile called Dungeoneering. This skill can be leveled up by playing dungeons, and XP gain scales with what floor you're playing and how well your team did. Leveling this skill gives health, compounding, dungeon stat increases, and 20 Skyblock XP per level. This turns into plus 40 Skyblock XP per level from Catacombs level 40 and above. The XP required to increase your Catacombs level scales very steeply, so you always want to be moving up floors when you can. Alright, those were probably all of the very basics, so now let's talk about some more specific functions. All dungeons are recommended to be played with a party of 5 people, including yourself. Note that dungeons will not be any easier if you have an undersized party of 4 people or less. Parties operate off of Hypixel's party system for simplicity's sake. This is especially useful for people that play in Hypixel often, as the party system should be pretty simple to understand. In fact, having a party for dungeons is so important that Mort won't even let you enter the floor alone. Though, upon completing floor 3, you can complete Adventurer Saul's quest, and you'll be able to solo dungeons from then on out. As mentioned before, there are many levels to dungeons, 15 to be exact. There's the entrance floor, which serves as a tutorial and has no boss. Floors 1 through 7, which all have unique bosses and introduce many new mechanics into the gameplay loop for every floor. Some examples include enemies, bosses, loot, rooms, among many other things. And there are Master Mode floors 1 through 7, which are mostly just super buffed versions of the previous 7 floors. All of your stats inside dungeons scale differently from what you're used to. There are lots of statistics behind it, but just note that you're generally going to be stronger in a dungeon. One big contributor to this is the item dungeonizing mechanic. If an item is dungeonized, the stats on it scale much higher when in dungeons. All loot obtained in dungeons is automatically dungeonized, but you can also dungeonize most non-dungeon items at Malik in the dungeon hub. Dungeon this, dungeon that. that. Blessings are another big player in the stats field. Blessings are general stat boosts found in dungeons that last for the remainder of the run once found. It doesn't matter who the blessing was found by, the stat boost will apply to all of your party members. There are 4 main types of blessings that can be obtained. The Blessing of Life, which increases your team's max health and health regeneration. The Blessing of Power, which increases your team's strength and crit damage. There's the Blessing of Stone, which is not only a strange name, but also increases your team's defense and overall damage. And finally, the Blessing of Wisdom, which increases your team's speed and intelligence. Though if you're playing with Party Finder, I can't imagine there's much intelligence there in the first place. You can find these blessings in many ways while in dungeons, just by naturally progressing through the run. And of course, you'll receive more of a base stat buff in specific areas depending on which class you choose. Class? There's classes now? Oh, this is getting overwhelming. No, trust me here, I got your back. All players are able to choose one of 5 classes when they're playing dungeons, and they can swap them before every single dungeon. These 5 classes in question being Berserk, which is a melee DPS class that focuses on face-to-face, up-close and personal combat. Mage, which is a ranged DPS class that will rely on mana for ability use to deal damage. Archer, which is another ranged DPS class that requires arrows. Quick side note about the Archer class, this becomes by far the best class for damage on the later floors. Tank, which is a support class, is absolutely necessary to have in the later floors. In my opinion, this class is severely underutilized in the lower floors. And finally, Healer, which is another support class that helps keep the team alive. I believe that this class is especially helpful in the lower floors. All of these classes are given passive bonuses to certain stats depending on what class they choose. The respective stat boosts are even larger if there's only one party member playing that class. This means that overall, dungeons are going to be easier and much faster with a more diverse party. You're also given 2 abilities you can use to help aid your team in dungeons, a low cooldown normal ability and a higher cooldown ultimate. These abilities can be used either through the dungeon orb item, which is given to you by Mort before starting the run, or through keybinds, specifically your drop and drop stack binds. Sadly, there's no further way to customize it beyond that. All 5 classes have different abilities. They all do things that make sense and work well with the selected class. For example, the Mage class's normal ability fires an exploding sheep that deals damage, and the Healer's ultimate ability fully heals all party members and provides a massive overheal effect. Alright, that's cool and all, but what if I get a leech on my team? How does Hypixel know if my teammate is contributing positively to my party or not? That's where class milestones come into play. The idea behind class milestones is to prevent players from going AFK or just not helping the team at all. I guess there could also be an argument made that the system exists to prevent people from rushing to higher floors with terrible gear. The methods to reaching your milestones are different depending on which class you choose to play. A Berserk's milestones will be completed by dealing any kind of damage in the dungeon. A Mage will reach their desired milestone by dealing specifically ability damage. An Archer will be graded based on how much range damage they do. Tanks have a very unique milestone requirement. As a tank, you need to both take damage and deal damage. And finally, the Healer earns their milestone by dealing damage and healing their teammates. Crazy, I know. Of course, like everything, these requirements are more strict on higher dungeon floors. So why should you care about milestones? I mean, what are they gonna do? Kick you out of the dungeon? Worse, they waste your time. If you don't reach at least class milestone 2, you don't receive any rewards for playing the dungeon. And if you don't reach at least class milestone 3, you'll receive a heavily reduced amount of Catacombs XP for that run. I believe it takes what you would have received and cuts it in half. On the topic of Catacombs XP, did you know that the first 4 dungeons you complete of the day give bonus XP, similar to the mining commissions? I didn't know that until doing the research for this video. Pretty neat, huh? But anyways, the maximum attainable class milestone is 9, but anything beyond 3 is purely cosmetic and doesn't change a thing. Okay, now you're ready to hop into the dungeons and start looking at the more physical side of things. Let's start with the dungeon rooms layout. Each dungeon is randomly generated while meeting certain criteria. The criteria being a fairy room, an entrance, and an exit, as well as at least 2 or more puzzle rooms. Once a dungeon is started, you'll be given a map. The map will provide a top-down view of the dungeon's layout. The more you explore, the more boxes on the map are unlocked. You also may have noticed that the compartments on the map are colorized, and that's not just cosmetic. You can tell what type of room you're looking at just by the color alone. I'll summarize what each color means. The green box is spawn. It's always the same, and it's generally a safe area. The brown boxes are standard rooms, and they are by far the most common. They come in all different shapes and sizes, and have the most unique rooms available to generate. Purple boxes are puzzle rooms. Most of the time, you could fail puzzle rooms, so make sure you know what you're doing before attempting to complete one. Some of the puzzle rooms you can come across are tic-tac-toe, 3 weirdos, creeper beams, waterboard, teleport maze, higher lower, boulder, icefill, ice path, omnisense quiz, and bomb defuse. Keep in mind that some of these puzzles will only be seen in higher floors. The yellow boxes are buffed mini-boss rooms. These rooms contain nothing but a singular mob, but boy is this mob tough. I really don't suggest you enter these rooms alone unless you have a blatant death wish. The orange boxes are trap rooms. These rooms only generate on floors 3 or higher and are considered to be the most difficult to clear. In this room, all abilities are disabled, and it's mostly just a test of skill rather than your gear. The pink room is the fairy room, which contains fairies. Who would have thought? These fairies have a 100% chance to drop a revive stone when killed, which is an item that revives your teammates when used. Fairies can also be killed when you're a ghost, so if you're dead, punch a fairy to revive yourself. This room also features a small healing pool, which can be used to cheese certain enemies if necessary. And finally, red room is known as the blood room. You need a blood key to open this door, more on that later, and a mob called the Watcher is featured inside. The Watcher is an enemy that is an invulnerable eye that summons a lot of undead mobs to test your skills. Once enough undead are defeated, the Watcher will allow you to move on to the floor's boss. This pre-boss fight exists on every floor, even the entrance. Hey, I'm glad you made it this far into the video. If you learned anything new, or if you just found it entertaining, please consider leaving a like on it and commenting your thoughts. Engaging with the video in any way helps push it out to more people and keeps me motivated to create more. Help me make this a real job. Let's prove my dad wrong. That was a joke. Love you, Dad. Okay, thank you. Let's get back to the video. You may have also noticed that some rooms have a white or green checkmark on them. This is meant to show their completion status. If a room has a white checkmark over it, that means that all of the required mobs have been killed, but there are still some secrets that could be found. If a room has a green checkmark, that means that everything in that room has been completed. Now, if a room has a big red X over it, that means that the room has been failed. This is irreversible. Note that this only really appears on the puzzle rooms. There are archways that connect each room in dungeons, and some of them are locked behind doors which require keys. There are two main kinds of keys, wither keys and blood keys. The archways that directly follow the path from spawn to the blood room will always be locked with wither doors. The final archway that leads into the blood room is blocked by the blood door, which behaves the same way as any other wither door would. If you haven't already put it together, wither keys unlock wither doors and the blood key unlocks the blood door. Again, finding any archway with no doors will lead to a room that is off track from the blood room. Okay, now that we understand everything about the layout of a dungeon, let's move on to the mobs. Like everything else, more difficult and unique mobs will spawn on higher floors, adding more challenge. Some common mobs include crypt lurkers, zombie soldiers, undead skeletons, and tank zombies. These are but just a handful of the mobs you'll find yourself up against in dungeons. Common enemies can also spawn with modifiers that either tweak their stats or give them new abilities that they wouldn't otherwise have. There's flaming, which essentially enchants a mob with fire aspect. Stormy mobs will deal 10% of your health's worth of damage every 5 seconds if you get too close to it. Mobs with the speedy modifier are very fast. Fortified mobs are granted plus 10% defense, and finally, mobs with the healthy modifier are given plus 30% health. I think that this system exists just to add more depth into dungeons, and it usually isn't big enough to make any impact. These mobs can also drop items mid-run, such as gear and utility items. Most of the common mobs will drop their respective armor sets as well as their weapon. For example, a zombie grunt will drop rotten armor, and a crypt undead will drop a dreadlord sword. The existence of common mobs implies the existence of lesser common mobs. These are known as dungeons mini-bosses. The lost adventurer and the angry archaeologist can spawn on any floor, so be prepared to meet them from the very beginning. The lost adventurer will appear to be wearing dragon armor with a diamond sword. The dragon armor can either be holy, unstable, protector, or superior. It's worth noting that these mini-bosses will drop dragon fragments that match their armor type. The angry archaeologist will appear to be a player wearing fully enchanted diamond armor with an enchanted diamond sword. They don't drop any gear, but you'll still have to defeat them in order to progress in the dungeon. Floor 3 introduces two new mini-bosses that will appear from here on out. The Shadow Assassin, which you cannot see until getting close to it and deals way too much damage, and King Midas, who appears to be a player in full golden armor with a golden sword. Midas can only be found in yellow mini-boss rooms, so you can always predict the encounter ahead of time. Finally, Floor 4 will introduce one last dungeon mini-boss that will appear from this floor onward, the Frozen Adventurer. This mob will appear to be a player wearing frozen blaze armor and wields an enchanted stick. What makes this mob unique is his 1 in 1000 drop, the Ice Spray Wand. Dropping this item can make you seriously rich very fast. While running around in any floor of dungeons, you may come across traps in some rooms. Traps can be defined as any non-mob danger that tries to kill your team. No matter who you are, they're always dangerous, since the damaging traps deal damage based on a percentage of your health rather than just a fixed amount. Some of the more common traps are the arrow trap, tripwire traps, and flame traps. These three traps can be found in standard dungeon rooms quite often. There are also some less common and room-specific traps, those being the crusher trap, the pitfall trap, and it could be argued that the death mite mob counts as a trap, since you can't realistically kill it, but it's a mob nonetheless. Dungeon secrets are one of the most important things that a dungeon party should be going out of their way to discover. Secrets exist in almost every room of every dungeon floor. Here are some examples of some of the secrets you could find. A chest that you need to open, which could either give a player an item or activate a blessing. Just an item to pick up off the ground, which tends to be a dungeon utility item. Killing a bat, which again will drop either an item or activate a blessing. Right-clicking on a wither essence, which will appear as a pure black player head on the ground. And redstone keys, which look like red skeleton skulls. These can be picked up and placed somewhere else in the room to trigger an event. Some secrets may require you to utilize a teleportation item or ignite a super boom TNT to clear an entrance to the secret. You should be fine discovering most secrets without teleportation though, it just makes the process much faster. On top of that, the Skyblock community has also developed some mods that you're allowed to install and use on Hypixel, which can point you in the direction of some of these secrets. I've made a video on this as well. Now that we've gone through an entire dungeon, it's time we talk more details on the conditions and variables of completion. There are 4 ways to end a dungeon once starting it. 3 result in a failed run, and only 1 results in a clear. If all party members die at the same time or become ghosts, your team fails the run. If all party members leave the dungeon, the run is cancelled. If your party takes more than 70 minutes to complete the floor, that also counts as a failure due to time. The only win condition is to defeat the final boss of the floor. Only then will the run be counted as cleared. Dungeon score is probably the most important statistic to focus on in dungeons. Think of it like a performance grade for the run. At the end of every dungeon, your team is given a letter grade. The grade is the same for every party member, no matter what their milestone is or how much they contributed. The grade ranges from a D to an S+, and a lot can be done to either lose or gain score. For example, a D grade means that your party earned less than 100 total score in the run. 270 scores needed for an S, and an S+ requires at least 300. Remember, you can't get anything above an S+. So why does your team's dungeon score matter? Other than your class milestones, it's the single biggest thing you should be worried about in dungeons. Like I said before, your dungeon score directly decides your letter grade, and the higher grade your team gets, the more rewards and catacombs XP your party earns. Grades of D, C, and B will only earn your party the 3 lowest tiers of chests at the end of the run: wood, gold, and diamond chests. An A grade will offer you the emerald tier chest, and an S will provide the group an obsidian chest. These chests will cost coins to open, which will be withdrawn from your bank automatically. The pricing of the chest scales higher depending on what floor you're on. However, the wood chest, which is the lowest tier, will always be free to open in every floor of the catacombs. On top of that, starting at floor 5, the fabled bedrock chest can spawn if your team gets an S+, a score of 300 or higher. The higher the tier of chest, the more likely it is to have a rare or valuable item for you to unlock. Okay, so we want as high of a dungeon score as possible by the time the run is complete. So how do we get there? Dungeon score calculation is divided into 4 main categories: skill, exploration, speed, and bonus. The skill category can earn your team up to 100 score, and you begin the dungeon with a base of 20 skill score. You can lose skill score by failing a puzzle room and dying. Dying will reduce your team's score by 2 every death. Skill score scales with the amount of cleared rooms, and it doesn't include secrets. The exploration category can earn your team up to another 100 score, and it also scales with the percentage of rooms that have been discovered and cleared. The main difference being, the exploration category is where all of the score from finding secrets is added up. The speed category can earn your group up to, again, another 100 score, and will start at a base of 100 when the dungeon starts. If the dungeon is fully completed under the time limit provided, your team gets the full plus 100 score for speed. However, if the time limit is surpassed, even by a second, your speed score will start to deplete over time. Finally, the bonus category can only be increased under 2 conditions: opening crypts and killing crypt undeads, and killing mimics that appear from chests. Crypts can be blown up to reveal the crypt undead, which give plus 1 bonus score when killed, and they appear on every floor. Mimics, however, only appear in the higher floors and give plus 2 bonus score when killed. The maximum bonus score that your party can receive with crypts is 5, and another 2 from mimics. This means that the bonus category acts as a safety score, since you can surpass the requirement of 300 total score for the S+. There are a couple of other ways to earn more dungeon score that don't fit into either of the 4 categories, so I'll just list them out here. If Mayor Paul is elected, he has a chance to have a perk active called Easy Peasy. This perk adds 10 extra score to your dungeon runs after all of their calculations. So, just for the sake of knowing, the absolute maximum possible score on a high dungeons floor is 317. It's a cool flex, I guess. This isn't necessarily a way to increase your score, but rather a method of losing less. The spirit pet has an ability that halves the score penalty for the first death, losing the team only 1 point instead of 2. Okay, that was a lot, so let's quickly recap the process of completing a dungeon from start to finish. Step 1, find a party to play with. You can choose either Party Finder or develop a permanent party with some friends. Next, queue up for a floor you're comfortable with and choose a class to play. It will always be more effective and efficient if your party plays different classes. Then, divide up the work between your party for the pre-boss portion of the dungeon. This is known as the clear phase. Someone should be clearing the required mobs in every room, opening every wither door with the goal of reaching the blood room. This is known as blood rushing. Someone else should be running around completing all the puzzle rooms. All others should be clearing other rooms for mobs and finding as many secrets as possible. Make sure that you and all of your party members reach at least class milestone 3. Once the team's desired score is met, typically 270 or 300, enter the blood room portal. This will start the boss fight where you and your team will have to work together to defeat the boss. Now that the boss is defeated and the dungeon is complete, you're able to check inside each chest and make a decision for which one you want to open. Whew, alright, let's take a breather. I hope that this video has made your transition into dungeons just a little bit less intimidating. I know that Hypixel Skyblock lacks a real tutorial for dungeons, which really sucks because it's a really interesting part of the game that has a lot of content. To be fair, there is an official wiki page that includes most of the topics I covered in this video, but I figured it would be more convenient and plain entertaining if I summarized it in video form. I'll put a link to the aforementioned wiki page in the description below. Think of it as me citing my sources. That's gonna be it though. Thank you for all of the support recently, subscribe if you'd like to, and I'm sure I'll see you soon.